Tonight, as I mentioned, we're going to go through, an overview on all of the different things that hopefully will prepare you for getting started in the application process. Here at Southwestern, we have already launched the application for fall 2026. It opened on September 2nd, and we have had some submissions already. But please, please, please do not worry. There is a lot of time in the cycle. We are really just in the infancy stages. So one of the things that sometimes people ask about are kind of like when is optimal, and that's going to be a different timeline potentially for each one of you. So you want to try to figure out when you can apply as early as possible to maximize the number of spaces available in admission at each individual school, but you also want to make sure you're applying when you feel like your application is at its strongest. So it doesn't help you to kind of rush through the process. It doesn't help you to rush the LSAT prep. It doesn't help you to rush your personal statement, et cetera. If, you're just trying to meet a deadline, even an arbitrary one that you've come up with in your own mind. So I just want to put that out there before we get into the rest of the content. So some overall tips for getting started. Everything that you submit for your law school application is an exercise in your judgment. And hopefully it's good judgment. Hopefully you're, exhibiting professionalism. You are, in fact, obviously applying for entry into a professional degree. And this is really sort of the first official product, if you will, that's going to be evidence of that endeavor. So that's another reason why I was saying you want to really make sure you take the time to craft a strong application. Now, what may feel strong to you may be relative. And each of you are going to have different strengths, and each of you might have some potentially different challenges or weaknesses to overcome in the application. So that's another reason you have to be very reflective about the process and really making sure that you are taking time to convey the proper information about yourselves. It's incredibly important for you to make sure that you are answering the questions correctly and that you are following the instructions given by each individual law school. From an organizational standpoint, you should consider creating a spreadsheet. And even if you're not really a spreadsheet person, maybe you can, adapt this into some other format, but really a spreadsheet or something akin to that is going to be your best organizational tool. The way I sort of think about the spreadsheet is across the rows are all the things about the schools. The columns are the things and the rows are the schools. You want to flip it, that's your prerogative, no problem. But, in terms of keeping track of deadlines, priority deadlines, optional things, mandatory things, who wants a specific statement answered for the personal statement, who has an open-ended, how many letters of recommendation, what's recommended versus what is maximum, what is required. What advice did you get about a particular school? What programs do they have? Their geographic regions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of things to try to keep track of. So if you start that in the early stages, it'll help you be better organized in not just crafting the materials, but then ultimately in your school selection process too. Okay. Here are the basic components of a law school application. Now, some of these things are going to vary from school to school. So obviously I'm looking at this through the lens at Southwestern, but some of this is going to be pretty universal. So most schools still do require the LSAT. Some schools, as some of you may know, will allow you to submit the GRE instead of the LSAT. But that's really just one component in the application, right? It's not the entirety of the application. At Southwestern, we most definitely still do require the LSAT, but we will allow the GRE to be submitted in addition to. So every application is going to have at least 2 electronic documents that come into the school when you apply. There's going to be the Credential Assembly Service Report, or CAS, and it's going to have what we call in the front sheet, which is called the banner sheet. That's going to have a summary of your academic history, where you've attended, your grade trends. It's going to have your cumulative GPA, your degree GPA, the LSAT scores you have taken. If there's more than one, it will be there. If you've canceled, there'll be a notation for a cancellation. It'll tell us if you've attended a law school previously, et cetera. It's also going to have in this document the other things that are listed here, all of your undergraduate transcripts. Those are all required to be sent to LSAC. That is what makes up the cumulative GPA that LSAC calculates and what all law schools use for the application review process. Any graduate transcripts might also be able to be sent, but that may be up to the law school that you're applying to in terms of do they require it or is it optional? For the most part, graduate transcripts are considered optional. If you attended your undergraduate degree outside of the US or Canada, then you're going to go through a foreign educated evaluation process. And that's going to look a little different, but it's still going to come through LSAC. There's the actual LSAT writing sample, and then the letters of recommendation if you use the service that LSAC provides, which we do recommend. Southwestern requires at least one letter, the maximum of 3. We don't have any other restrictions besides those numbers, but some schools will require that, say, for example, at least one letter be academic, or there might be schools that don't require any letters. So again, going back to my comment about this is an exercise in your judgment, you have to think about all the different things you want to have compiled on your behalf. Then the second electronic document is the application itself. Sometimes we call it the e-app, sometimes we call it the flex app. That's just like internal lingo, but it's your application. So you fill out the application. There's a lot of standardized questions that law schools can share the information, and then you're going to have like school specific questions. You're going to anticipate things like personal statements. At Southwestern, that is required. We also have some optional statements. There's a required resume, and then we have a combination of both required or optional addenda. So an example of an optional addenda would be like an LSAT addendum, for example. But a required one would be a character and fitness statement. So again, you're going to have to pay careful attention to the instructions to make sure you're hitting all the things. Okay, so here's some information about the LSAT. Some of you may know that in about a year ago, it did undergo some changes. So if you haven't taken the LSAT prior to August 24, then you're just kind of living in this new world. If you've taken it before and are taking it again, then you're going to see the test has changed a little bit. But essentially, it's still 4 hours. It's still 4 35-minute sections. The LSAT writing sample itself has evolved. So now they call it this argumentative writing. But if you already have an LSAT writing sample on file, you do not need to do the argumentative writing. If you don't have one on file, then you will. And you're required to have at least one LSAT writing sample for your scores to be submitted to any school. There are some limitations on the number of times you can take the LSAT. And there's a lot of other I don't want to call it controversy, but there's a lot of mixed opinions about the concept of taking the test more than once. So I'm going to give you my personal opinion and advice on it. I think if you are someone who has not taken the LSAT yet, you should plan and hope to only take it once. I don't think it should be your plan to take it multiple times. Now, are there circumstances where you should? Yes, absolutely. And you have those opportunities if you need them. But to just go in with the mindset, as some applicants do, of, oh, I'm going to take it 2 or 3 times, ask yourself really why. What are you hoping to really gain by doing that? It's stressful, it's expensive, and you could end up with scores that are very disparate. And then you're trying to figure out how to explain that to schools. Now, there are features like score preview, which you can pay extra money for in order to see your scores first before you release them. But please also, as I mentioned, on the banner sheet, since we can see if you have cancellations, obviously we can't see your score, but we can see that you had cancellations. And we will look sometimes at some kind of patterns. And it can be a little bit concerning if we see somebody is continuously canceling their scores. Also think about the fact that what if you canceled a score and then you took the test again and now your score is lower? You can't go back and resurrect the score that you canceled. So just be very thoughtful about it. Those score preview canceled scores do count towards your total number of scores that you are allowed. So that's another reason to, just be very methodical and intentional about what you're doing. If you're taking the test and you really don't feel well, maybe that's a good reason to cancel your score. You wouldn't have known in advance that you weren't going to feel well. But some people, unfortunately, do just think, oh, it's like a throwaway one. I just want to take one for real, and then I'm not going to keep it, and I'll just take it again. Or maybe they do keep it. I think you just kind of put yourself in this position where you're trying to defend the decisions that you made. So again, my personal advice is to plan to take it more than once. But if you do need to take it more than once, you do have that opportunity. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about letters of recommendation. Letters of rec, and as I mentioned, they can be required or just optional depending on the school. While we do not have a specific requirement about if they're academic versus professional, those are basically the two categories. I will say there is an expectation. If you are coming out of a program, be it undergrad or graduate or something of that nature, within a couple of years, I think we do have an expectation that you're going to have one of your letters be academic. That doesn't always work out. Sometimes people didn't really make strong relationships while they were in school. Or maybe you were somebody who worked also while you were in school, and your strongest letters are going to be professional. At the end of the day, for us, that's fine. But I just want you to be aware of sort of some expectations that there could be. But if a school does have an academic letter of requirement, then you will need to meet that requirement, regardless of what you think your circumstances will be. You want to still follow their instructions. But these letters really do serve quite a bit of significance in the process because if you think about, those components that I showed you, you have the quantitative things, which are really just two numbers, your LSAT score and your undergraduate GPA. And of course, if you have multiple scores, those are part of the equation too. And then you have your other information, right? Your non-quantitative things. So that's going to be things like your letters of rec, your statements, your writing, right? All these other pieces of information. And this is the only space where someone else is going to advocate on your behalf. So presumably, you've chosen people who know you well, who really endorse your desire to go to law school, and are going to have some very complementary and compelling evidence as to why they are supportive of this, dream of yours. So depending on if they're academic or professional, the language obviously is going to have a little bit of variation there, but they should still be able to kind of get at the heart of how and why you would be a good candidate for law school. So here are some basic tips. We could do whole sessions just on really any one of these topics. But as I mentioned, you're going to be confronted with the idea of either academic or professional or combinations of. I mentioned you should be choosing someone who knows you very well. This is not the, family friend that you only know through, another relative in your life. If they don't actually know you well, they're not going to be able to say anything that's compelling on your behalf. You need to also kind of back into when you want to have this information submitted. If you are somebody who wants to have your law school application submitted, let's say by December 31st, then you should already be trying to meet with people to get your letters in by around Thanksgiving. Give yourself a little bit of a buffer in case they're delayed. You don't want to have your timeline compromised because, perhaps you asked too late or the other person got too busy. So really give yourself a good buffer. It's only most important to you. So this person really could be in your corner and really could want to help you, but at the end of the day, it's not their top priority. And so you need to make sure you are giving them plenty of time. So you want to meet with them, right? You want to ask to set up a time, whether it's in person or on Zoom. You want to take them to coffee, go to lunch, whatever it looks like. And you want to ask them if they will write this letter. Will they be able to do it in a certain time frame? And will it be positive? That's a weird thing to ask, right? Will you write something nice about me? That's uncomfortable. But you have to figure out how to ask that in a way that feels, authentic to your relationship. If you get any kind of pushback, if you get any kind of, I don't know, I'm really busy, I have a lot of other things I'm doing, I have a lot of other people who've asked me, whatever that is, I would probably back off of that person. Oh, I didn't realize. Oh, totally understand. No problem. I can ask somebody else. Because what you don't want to have happen is you to push them and push them to the point where they feel like they have to say yes. And either they're not going to do a good job, or they're going to say something negative about you, which does happen, or they might do it late, which then means, right, for us, let me explain that. For us, we will not allow your CAS report, your LSAT score, and your grades, your transcripts to be transmitted to us until that letter of recommendation that we require is on file. Everything else could be ready to go, but we have it set that we don't want that CAS report until the letters have hit. So if you wanted your file to, in theory, be complete, right, which means everything has come in, and then you could, in theory, start the review process. If you wanted that to happen by a certain date, and your recommender is holding it up, then they've now pushed you into a timeline that you were, trying to work to get out ahead of. So you have to kind of, this is like the strategy part too. So my point being, if they're at all reluctant, and they might be really big supporters of yours, but they really might have other things that they are having to juggle, just politely thank them for their time to meet with you and move on to somebody else. Okay, that's I think an important takeaway. When you do meet with them, though, have your resume, have a decent draft of a personal statement. Hopefully, this is not the first time they've ever heard you talk about wanting to go to law school. But have that kind of conversation, and then maybe you'll find that this is something you can keep going and discussing with them in sort of like a mentor capacity, if you will. And then you want to, think again to point number 5 here, choose to be concise. So while we require 1, we will accept up to 3. That doesn't mean just submit 3. 3 mediocre letters is not better than 1 excellent letter. So don't submit just to the maximum of something just because you can. Okay, so that's the good judgment part that I hope you're all going to use. Okay, let's talk a little bit about personal statement. I see some folks on here who joined me for a personal statement workshop last night. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about this again. So this is a writing sample first and foremost, right? So they have the LSAT writing sample, but that's under time conditions. It's not expected to be perfect, but the personal statement should be. There should not be a single error of any nature in that personal statement. This is not something you are rushing. This is not something you haven't proofread. This is not something you haven't had 75 other people proofread for you or whatever that number is. It should be flawless. You should think of it as a written interview with whomever is going to read your file, the 1, the 2, the 5, however many people read your file at any given school. And so because of that, you should think about the topics that are appropriate, the topics that are going to be compelling, the topics that are going to be positive and affirming about why they should want to choose you. So maybe that's why you want to go to law school. Maybe that's what you want to do with your law degree. Maybe that's why that particular school. Maybe, right, there's a lot of things, but you probably can't write about all of them all in one statement. So this is a really intense writing exercise, honestly, because you're going to have to write and you're going to have to write about many different themes. You're going to have to see what really feels genuine and authentic. Then you're going to have to edit it away. You might have to take some stuff out. Maybe you move it to another piece in the application, right? This is a long process. So many people many people write their personal statement over many, many months. And maybe it's something you kind of just go back to on a regular basis. You can kind of look at it with fresher eyes. Or if you've written a draft and you've given it to somebody to proofread or for feedback, you're waiting for it to come back, then you're going to implement the notes, that type of thing. Remember, I can't say it enough. It is a reflection on your judgment and your professionalism. So if something you're trying to do to stand out, you are probably going to stand out for the wrong reasons. It is okay to write what you might look back on and say is sort of like a simple and boring personal statement. That is okay. It doesn't need to be flashy. It doesn't need to have a hook. It doesn't need to have quotes or, it's not a creative writing piece. It should just be genuine. It should just be who you are. So if you think of it as an interview, what would you do or say in an interview to make a good impression? And how might you want to convey to whomever's interviewing you, hey, I'm a person you should want at your school. These are the things that I bring to the table. This is why I'm amazing. The things that may be, potential negatives in your file or could need some extra explanation, that goes somewhere else. That's the kind of stuff that goes into an addendum. That's where you can kind of talk about, I did have this bad semester in school, a family member was really sick and I was having to take care of them and my grades really, plummeted, but everything is good now and you'll see my grades went up, right? That's context. And that is valuable in its own right, but that is not the kind of stuff you would say in an interview. And that's not the kind of stuff you would put in a personal statement. So really have a really clear understanding of how this personal statement is going to be used. By all means, please make sure you are following the instructions, because if a school asks you to answer a specific question or prompt, that is what you're going to do. So it's not a one-size-fits-all personal statement for every law school. Some schools, you're going to want to tailor it You're going to want to put in that extra effort. You're probably more interested in some schools than in others. And for those schools that you are more interested, you should be able to identify why, and you should want to put in that extra effort into their application materials. Now, at Southwestern, we do also have optional statements where we allow you to tell us kind of like why you or why Southwestern. So for us, at least, we allow you to kind of compartmentalize that information into different statements, allowing for a more palatable read, but that's not necessarily the case in every school's application process. So you're going to have to kind of navigate that for yourselves. So here are some tips. Be accurate, right? Follow those directions, do what you need to do. Write this in the first person. As I said, this is not a creative writing piece. You're not telling someone else's story. Write this about yourself. Be confident, be impactful, be meticulous. Read it backwards, read it out loud. Have as many people as you need to have read this to make sure that there are no grammatical errors, that there's no formatting errors, that you didn't do some kind of crazy, replace all, that type of thing. You really want to make sure it's spotless. Things to avoid. Now, this is 10 things. I could have written 10,000 things, but these are 10. You don't know who's going to read your file. You don't know what someone's particular bias may be. You don't know what something is going to like resonate. You don't know what things are going to offend. So again, be professional. As long as you stay in that mindset, you're going to be on the right track. I have number 2 is don't use quotes. I don't like quotes. They're a pet peeve of mine. I don't know most readers who like quotes. They're often not properly used and they just take up space. So not a fan of that. Don't talk too much about someone else. This is something we see a lot. This is usually the examples of somebody who, maybe one of their motivating factors to wanting to go to law school is a really like inspirational grandparent, say, for example. And the things that they struggled through, the things that they endured, the ways that they have kind of like persevered. And you spend a lot of real estate on somebody else. That's a missed opportunity. Okay. So it's okay to try to convey some of that information, but it should really be just like a snippet. And you don't want to give up that real estate. Do not use the wrong school's name. That's number 4. It should be like every other line. That's how important it is. This is one of the reasons I talk about the replace all. And an example of tailoring a law school application personal statement is not just like one line at the bottom of your statement that says, I'm ready to go to law school and I really want to go to Southwestern. But instead of saying Southwestern in there, you wrote another school's name because you thought, oh, I'll just kind of like replace and keep doing that. If I see it and I read your file, I'm going to deny your application. That's how strongly I feel about that. So that's not everybody's, and that's not like a formal policy, but the way I look at this is something that you are doing to try to get into a professional school. So that at the end of that professional school, when you get your license, that you want to hold someone's life or their liberty or their property or their children's custody or their estate or their whatever it is, you want to hold that in your hands. And you should be able to submit a statement that doesn't have somebody else's name in it. So please don't do that. Don't try to stand out by doing strange things. Now, what may you ask are strange things? Don't write a legal memo as your personal statement. That's not what we asked for. Don't write a poem. Don't send pictures. Don't try to be cutesy. And this really applies to more than just the personal statement. Your resume shouldn't have photos on it, shouldn't have weird colors. It doesn't need strange formatting. Again, trying to stand out usually doesn't allow you to stand out in a positive way. I mentioned already number 6, you want to use, the personal statement to just be really positive. You can cover things that are contextually that need explaining in other places. Don't worry about telling us what you think we want to hear. Don't regurgitate your resume. We already have your resume. That doesn't mean you can't take an element of your resume and expand upon it in your personal statement, but don't just write it as a narrative. You don't need a sob story. That's kind of a big misnomer. People think, oh, if you haven't had this like tragedy that you've endured, what would you write about? And that's really all we want to read. And that's just simply not true. And number 10, don't assume you will get another chance at a first impression. So for most of you, when you're applying to law schools, any law school, this is it. These documents that you put together and you send out into the universe, that's it. That's what the schools are going to make a decision based on. Most schools don't have the capacity to interview. Most schools you will never meet anybody from. And, you can't alter, right? You can't go back and say, oh, can I give you a new personal statement? Because I just realized it says the wrong school's name or it has this typo. Can I give you something else? No, like you submitted and this is now part of your file and you have just kind of like live with it for that cycle. So just be really thoughtful about that. Also, to the extent that you do have interactions with people from the schools, you won't know when I answer the phone, but you might talk to me. And, it's unbelievable to me sometimes how somebody will be very rude on the phone. And then when I tell them who I am and what my position is, they're very nice, right? It shouldn't be that way. When you're interacting with any member of any law school, from the maintenance guy to the guy that trims the hedges to the security guard to the dean of the law school, you should behave courteously and professionally across the board. That's who we want in our communities. So we are expecting that kind of behavior. So that, while it's not part of the application, trust me when I say if you interact negatively at a school, it will make its way to the admissions office. They will know, and it will leave an impact. So just be really thoughtful about that. As stressful as the application can be, please make sure you're treating everybody professionally. Okay, so some typical questions or topics that are asked in an application. You might expect to see things about, did you have any interruptions? Did you work while you were in school? Did you have any leadership opportunities? Any extracurriculars? Where did you go to high school? Are you first generation? What's the highest level of education of your parents? Why that particular school? What is it at our school that you want to learn? What other law schools are you considering? Did you interact with anybody from any of these schools? Meaning, did you come to any events or do any things? Are you wanting to go full time or part time or in person or online? These types of things. Now, for the most part, these are questions that we ask, but these are also very common questions. So, you can use this to kind of also see that we're really trying to glean a lot about you, and we are trying to make a lot of assumptions based on very little information. But we really want to know, is this person going to come into our community and be an asset, right? Whatever that means. Having a different background, having a different level of interest. There's a wide menagerie of different things, and all of it should be complementary. So we try to gather this kind of information to better get to know you. Okay, so through the application process, we're going to have many events. We'll be doing many more Zoom events. We're going to have an in-person open house next Thursday. So if you're in the LA area and you want to come and do mock admissions with me, we're going to do that as an exercise with the group. We'd love to have you. There'll be a campus tour. We'll be doing a mock admissions on Zoom as well a little bit later in the fall. So if you can't do it in person, you can meet us then in an event like this. But there's a lot of opportunities. So that's going to be on the far right under the join us again. There's going to be a link that says future events. So it's swlaw.edu/admissionscal. You can find all of our events there. We also have an info session coming up for our online JD program. That's on September 30th, I believe. And that link to sign up is also on our website. If you want to set up a counseling appointment or to meet with somebody, that's the link in the middle to set up the meeting. Please, 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 please do not request a meeting just to ask what the application requirements are or some other similar type of information that can be found on our website. You should do due diligence and review these things for yourselves. I promise there's way more information on the website than we can just convey to you, in a 15-minute conversation. So please do your research first. But if you have questions, if you want to understand more of nuance, if you want to learn more about X, Y, or Z, that's when you should be trying to set up the meeting, okay? But do try to find this information on the website first. I say this because we get a lot of requests, and many of the things that people say on there that they want to talk about are things they could have just found on the website. And if we try to schedule every single person to have the meeting that they want, we would be weeks out before we could get any one of you scheduled. So in an interest to help yourselves get your appointments, just try to learn a little bit that you can on the website first, which goes, I guess I worked in opposite direction here. doing this research, right? Learning about each individual school, learning about Southwestern, our programs, our concentrations. We can send you things. We also have electronic documents that you can review, our view book, for example, and that type of information is also on the website. So there's a lot of information there. But please, if you have questions about anything on the application, or you're not sure how to handle it, reach out to the admissions office. In lieu of just requesting to set up a meeting, you can just call us or you can just send an email and we can help you that way too. It's also much faster. So there's a lot of different ways for you to interact with us, and we, want to make it as pleasant as possible for you and not to create any delays in getting back to you.